Thank you for such a warm welcome. Had a great time visiting with Pastor Johnson and Mrs. Johnson before service and hearing the story of how you all got to where you are. And what a great day to be serving the Lord and to be able to study His Word together. You may have heard of a mystery novelist by the name of Agatha Christie. She had a number of famous novels, one of them Murder on the Orient Express, which was remade into a movie recently. And anyway, Agatha Christie's husband was a well-known archaeologist. In fact, he worked at Abraham's hometown of with Leonard Woolley in the excavations there. And so Agatha Christie spent a good bit of time on the archaeological sites. And so she would weave this into her mystery novels. And she was once asked, what is the greatest thing about being married to an archaeologist? She thought and responded, the older I get, the more interesting he finds me. This morning I want to talk to you about Jericho because it all begins at Jericho. The battle for the Bible rages at Jericho. Yes, there was a battle at Jericho 3,400 years ago, which was very critical. Joshua 6 tells us about it. We've studied this in great depth, leading into our excavations at biblical I or AI of Joshua 7 and 8. And until we understand Jericho and the battle that's going on over there and the role that archaeology plays in this battle, we won't really be able to get proper perspective. In our service at 11 o'clock, I'm going to be talking about illumination of the biblical text, how the text comes alive for us when we put it in a real-world culture and the faith applications that we draw from that. And then this evening, I'll be talking about Shiloh, where the tabernacle rested for over 3 centuries and where people went to connect with God, and our new excavations at biblical Shiloh and all that this is opening up in our understanding of the biblical world. What we want to do is take the text, the sacred text of the Bible, and juxtapose it, sit it side by side with the material culture, and see what I call synchronisms between the two. So let's get started, digging up the truth at Jericho. Well, it comes as no surprise to you that we've got a battle for the Bible. Here's what the experts have to say. The archaeological evidence leaves no option but to accept that there was no late bronze city, that's the period of the conquest, of Jericho about 1400 or 1200 on or around Ain Sultan, that's the modern name for Jericho. The huge ruins of the Hyksos city gave rise to the folk tale attached to the hero Joshua. Now, I want you to notice what this scholar is saying. This is just a legend. It's a folk tale. It's a myth. It's teleological. It didn't really happen. It's a morality tale. It's been included in the Bible to give you a moral story of what happens to people when they do bad things, but it's devoid of actual history. Don't worry, it gets worse. Notice what Ami Mazar says. Now, Mazar is one of the leading senior archaeologists in Israel. His grandfather, Benjamin Mazar, was one of the founding archaeologists in the land of Israel. Notice what Mazar says. Undoubtedly, the biblical story of the Battle of Jericho is legendary. What he means by legendary is it's only a legend. It didn't really happen. And I want you to look at the hubris of these scholars. Undoubtedly. No other way of looking at it, we're certain they would tell you. Well, how many of you know what Proverbs 21 says? The first one to present his case sounds right until another comes along. Well, another has come along. Here's what Naaman has to say in his well-known book from 1994. He writes, the narratives of the capture of Jericho and Ai and the conquest of the 6 cities of the Shephelah and the hill country of Judah are devoid of historical reality. Now, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, when you go to most seminaries today, when you're studying theological education, this is what people are fed. The Bible is devoid of historical reality. Now, if another side is never presented, people walk away from this going, well, I believe in God and I want to believe in the Bible, but it must not be trustworthy. This is from a more recent biblical work, the New Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible. You'll see it on the shelves of all theological schools by Evie Levine. Here's what Levine writes. Jericho was destroyed by fire at the end of the Middle Bronze Age, approximately 15 BC. That's not the date of the Bible, by the way. The biblical date would be 1406. We know this from 1 Kings 6:1. You see, the way we build a biblical chronology is from the Bible. The way we build a biblical chronology is from the Bible. Amen. So here's how you do it. 1 Kings 6:1. 480 years before the building of Solomon's temple, the Israelites exited from Egypt. Fortunately, we all agree on when Solomon's temple was built, in 966. So we add 480 to 966, and that adds up to, a little early in the morning, 1446. 966 plus 480 is 1446. That's the biblical date of the Exodus. Now, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, putting us then at 1406 for the entrance into the Promised Land. Now, we have synchronisms in the text itself. Remember the judge Jephthah in Judges 11? He said to the king of Ammon, "My people have now been in this land for 300 years. Well, we all agree that you would place Jephthah at around the year 1100. So 1100 plus 300 would be 1400. Again, the exact date. So we're quite clear on the biblical date. And so when he says that it was destroyed in 1560, you see what he's getting at. It was this destruction that Garstang, who you're about to learn about, attributed to Joshua and the Israelites. He confidently asserted that the story was confirmed in all material particulars. In other words, Garstang found that the archaeological evidence matched the biblical text when he excavated there in the 1930s. There is, however, no evidence linking the destruction with the invading Israelites. Now, let me just let that sink in for a second. There is no evidence linking this destruction with the invading Israelites. In fact, there is no physical evidence of invading Israelites at Jericho. Welcome to my world, the battle for the Bible. Now, this is the region that you all know very well. You'll see the Dead Sea, 65 miles north is the Sea of Galilee. Small little lake up here, Lake Semikonitis. And, of course, the great Mediterranean Sea out here. Mount Nebo, where Moses dies. Now, Shittim is about right here. So the Israelites camped, the final year of the 40 years, they're camped in the plains of Moab at a site called Shittim. Joshua 2:1, Joshua 3:1, Numbers 25:1. I spent 6 years working at this site along with Gary Byers. I don't know if Gary's here yet, but we know this site very well. And this is where Moses wrote the book of Deuteronomy, the second giving of the law. And after writing Deuteronomy, he goes up on Mount Nebo, sees the promised land, and there he dies. The Israelites then cross over and they camp at Gilgal, or in Hebrew, Gilgalim, the multiple campsites. So they probably camp by tribes in 12 different campsites. And from Gilgal, they go to the richest city in the world and one of the oldest cities in the world, the ancient pagan city of Jericho. A bunch of moon worshipers lived there. And before you get too critical, remember that Abraham was one of those moon worshipers as well, before God appeared to him. So they go to this great city of Jericho. They then, after victory in Joshua 6, move up into the highlands to Ai, and the word just means ruin or destruction. Ha'ai, you would have in Hebrew, the ruin. And they are defeated soundly in Joshua 7 because of the sin of Achan. They then deal with the sin of Achan, and then they have victory in Joshua chapter 8. So after the victory at Ai, they then move up to Shechem, where they renew covenant with Yahweh. Mount Ebal on one side, Mount Gerizim on the other side. They build an altar on Mount Ebal, the Bible tells us, and that altar has now been found. But that's a whole nother lecture for another time. But it sheds some very interesting light. Ultimately, they come down to Shiloh, which is about right here, and this is where they set up the tabernacle. So this will orient you to the area that we're discussing. Now, of course, the Bible tells us that the Jordan River was dammed in Joshua 3, 15, and 16, so that it was backed up completely. And we can see what the Jordan River would look like at various times. And it's not uncommon even in modernity for the Jordan River to be dammed and to flood. This is 1940 that you're looking at. And this is the map of the area. 15 miles north of Jericho is Adam, and this is where the Bible says that it dammed. Now, here's the site of Shittim, the modern archaeological site of El-Hammam, where Gary and I worked for a number of years together. So looking across and thinking about the story from this side, then we worked for a number of years here. And of course, Abraham and Lot were between Bethel and Ai when they parted ways. They looked out and saw the other side. So we have this unique perspective of working on both sides of the Jordan and looking across. And what's in the middle? Jericho. This is the serpentine look. You can see that the Jordan River is not at all straight. We say that from the Dead Sea to the Sea of Galilee is 65 miles as the crow flies, but it's a very windy river. And here at Adam, there are cliffs overlooking it, and it is not all uncommon, even in modern times, for there to be landslides. You know why? Because you have tectonic plates in the Rift Valley. The African and Arabian tectonic plates are right out there. That's why it's the lowest site on the face of the earth. And those tectonic plates are rubbing each other, and that creates earthquakes. And the Bible has a lot to say about earthquakes. The day that Jesus died, there was an earthquake. The day Jesus rose from the dead, there was an earthquake. And so it's very likely that it was an earthquake that caused these cliffs to collapse and caused the Jordan River to back up. Now, this is a view from the west of Ain Sultan, ancient Jericho. It's about 8 acres in size inside the walled city. Of course, not everyone lived inside the walls. There's about 65,000 people that live in this region today. Fortunately for them, they have water, and this is why the Bible calls it the city of palms, because they have an abundant water source there. This is Garstang's reconstruction of what Jericho would have looked like at the time of the conquest. As I said, about 8 acres in size. You can see the palms pictured there. The mountains in the background in the New Testament times come to be known as the Mount of Temptation, the mount where Satan takes Jesus and shows him the kingdoms of the world. And you can actually take a cable car ride from Jericho up to the top of the Mount of Temptations today. Now, Garstang was a well-known archaeologist in his days. He was the head of the British School of Archaeology at the time. He was predisposed to take the Bible as a serious text, and he did good archaeological work, obviously not with the technologies and all that we would have today, but we would by and large say that he did very good archaeological work. And when he went to Jericho between the wars, now there had been a dig just before World War I by the Germans, led by Selin and Watzinger, but when World War I came along, the tensions that were in the Middle East, of course the Ottoman Empire collapsed in World War I, and so trouble was brewing, and so this shut down the dig. Once things settled down after World War I in the 1930s, Garstang was able to go back and begin another significant dig at Jericho. But of course, then the tensions of World War II came about and were exacerbated and ultimately shut down that dig. Then finally, after World War II, you get the Kathleen Kenyon dig that comes about. So we'll kind of put all these in a context. Here's Garstang, and you can see that He is trying to stay out of the sun, which is a good thing to do on an archaeological site. It's very hot down in the Jordan Valley. He dated the destruction of Jericho to about 1400 BC. Now, we've already said that based on 1 Kings 6:1, we're confident of the biblical chronology, that the Israelites exited from Egypt in 1446. They wandered for 40 years. They entered the land about 1406. Garstang's date is about 1400. So this, again, matches very nicely with the biblical text. In the 1930s, this is what you would have been hearing in churches and in seminars and in seminaries. They're excavating Jericho. They're finding a correlation between the biblical text and the archaeological data. Garstang has a young lieutenant on his staff named Kathleen Kenyon. Now, let me tell you a bit about Kathleen Kenyon. She was a party girl in college. She didn't care a whole lot for studying. She was just kind of there because her parents were making her go there. And her dad was very well connected. He was the director of the British Museum, so he was well funded. He had good connections. And well, I guess like a lot of parents, he was interested in getting his daughter on track. And so he got her on a dig down in Africa with Mortimer Wheeler. And boy, she took to it immediately. She had a gift and was just really taken by archaeology. And so she caught on. And once she got a vision, then boy, when she went back to school, she was very focused. Her grades improved, and she finished her bachelor's. Never went any further than that in archaeology. But as I said earlier, the war broke out, and she had developed some expertise with pottery, with ceramics. And so Garstang asked her, they're preparing for final publication, he asked her if she would review the pottery that they had found. And pottery is very important to us in archaeology because before we have coins and other modern dating methods, we can use the ceramic typology of different time periods. The older material is in the deeper part of the tell. So as you dig down, the material is getting older. The methodology that she learned down in Africa from Mortimer Wheeler, she then applied when she came back, and they dug a significant work at the palaces of the Omride dynasty, of Ahab and Omri, and tried out this new methodology that we now call the Kenyan Wheeler method, which is sort of a vertical stratigraphic approach to archaeology. Well, when she began to double-check the ceramic findings of her boss, she didn't exactly agree with him. In fact, she went back to Garstang and said, "Boss, I think you got it all wrong here on your dating. You're dating this stuff to 1400. I think it dates to about 1550, 1560 instead. I think you got it all wrong." Now, a few things you should know about Kathleen Kenyon. She was a committed lesbian. Now, that may be a cool thing to be today in our culture, but it was not in those days. She was certainly ahead of her time in that regard. She, in her words, she was unencumbered by any biblical baggage. Unencumbered by any biblical baggage. Now, let me just say this. If you are committed to living a lifestyle contrary to the Bible, and if the Bible is actually true and can be proven to be true, then the God of the Bible has a moral claim on your life. And that's a very important point. Does the God of the Bible have a moral claim on my life? Is the Bible a trustworthy document, and is his word as good as his name? Well, Kenyon also said in her own words, "I have no expertise in late Bronze Age pottery." Now, you're going to see in the next few minutes, that's kind of funny because this whole fight comes down to pottery. And she's basing her argument that you can't trust the Bible on ceramics when she says that that's not her area of expertise. We're really going to boil it down to three things: pottery, walls, and scarabs that you're going to learn about. Of course, she's dealing with skulls here from the Neolithic period at Jericho. So Kenyon essentially then, with her father's backing and funding and support, is able to get a license in the 1950s to launch a new dig at Jericho. And it's a massive work. She has an army of people who are working there with her, and they do a long dig seasons, and they cut these huge trenches into Jericho that you will see today. Her conclusions are that it was destroyed in 1550, and that the destruction there has nothing to do with the Bible. So this sends a shot across the bow. Now, when Garstang told everybody you could trust the Bible, do you think that made national news? Do you think that made international news? But boy, when Kenyon said you can't trust the Bible, it's on headlines of every newspaper. It's out there in the media. Wow, you can't trust the Bible. It gets worse in the 1960s because on the heels of this, Joseph Calloway, I said yesterday he was a good Baptist, but I'm not sure he was a good Baptist. We'll just call him a Baptist. He, from Southern University, he goes and he does a dig at Et-Tel, which everyone accepted as the I or Ai of Abraham's day. And after Calloway's dig, he basically announces to the world, there's nothing here that supports the biblical text. Now, friends, if you lose Jericho and you lose Ai, you don't have a conquest. And if you don't have a conquest, you don't have a historical Hebrew Bible. And without a historical Hebrew Bible, we don't have a faith. And so the God of the Bible then has no moral claim on our lives. Well, Kenyon, in her work, starts this whole process. You can see here the areas that were excavated by the Germans under Watzinger and Selin and Watzinger, by Garstang in the 30s, by Kenyon in the 50s. And now we have a new dig that's been going on for over a decade, led by Sapienza University of Rome. And they're also finding some interesting things. This is a reconstruction of what the city would have looked like. Notice that there's a double wall, the inner wall and the outer wall, with people living in the wall. If you're a Bible reader, that should ring a bell, living in the wall at Jericho. This is the aerial, if you're taking that cable car going over it, and you can see the cuts. Here's those trenches, the famous Kenyan trenches that are cut in on the north and on the west. And here's Garstang doing his work. Now, notice how meticulous, you youngsters are going to laugh at this a little bit. This is the high technology of the 1930s, but this is what they had. And he's very careful, and he's in a tomb at Jericho. And before they move anything, it's just the way he found it. So they're carefully photographing and drawing everything and noting the layers that they have before anything is removed and then worked with. So he does good, careful work. And one of the things he finds are scarabs. Now, the Latin word scarabus means beetle or dung beetle. And on the backside, it's in the shape of a beetle. It has the iconography of a pharaoh. So when a new dynasty in Egypt comes to power, that pharaoh creates his iconography. No pharaoh after him ever uses the same iconography. It is unique to that administration. Well, for those of us who are wanting to synchronize the material with the biblical text, that's very important. Because in Egypt, they do have very solid dates that we can go from, and these scarabs are like gold. They enable us then to be very specific about when something happened, if we get it in a clean archaeological context. So Garstang finds these scarabs, and they date to the 18th Egyptian dynasty. Now, I don't expect you to learn all of Egyptian history, but I would like you to remember the 18th dynasty, because that's the part that matters to us when we're looking at the biblical account. These are all pharaohs from the 18th dynasty: Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and Amenhotep III. Well, this is problematic because Kathleen Kenyon says that there was no one living there at the time that the Bible says that Jericho was conquered, yet we have scarabs that are absolute evidence that there was. Here are those scarabs at the Rockefeller Museum. You can go visit them today. There's no doubt that they were there. So what does one do then if one is a skeptic and there is evidence that disproves one's position? It's called circular reasoning. Kenyon says these must be commemorative scarabs. Commemorative scarabs. They're a later people create these keepsakes of an earlier time, and then they're sold. Really? Who says and based on what? And who gets to decide what's commemorative and what's not? Oh, I'll tell you who gets to. When it doesn't fit your pattern, your paradigm, then you say it's commemorative. When it does fit, you say it couldn't possibly be commemorative. Welcome to my world. It's called circular reasoning. These are 18th dynasty pharaohs. And let's just say for a moment that Kenyon was right about this. And Thutmose III, very famous pharaoh. He conquered all of Canaan. Amenhotep III, also a well-known pharaoh. Hatshepsut. Now, in the history of Egypt, there have only been two female pharaohs, if you will, if you want to consider Cleopatra a pharaoh. Hatshepsut's the most famous. She was a usurper to the throne. Once she was defrocked from power, her name was chiseled from the monuments of Egypt. Hatshepsut became persona non grata throughout all of Egyptian history. The most hated woman. We're not talking about Betsy Ross here, folks. This is the most hated woman in all of Egyptian history. And you mean to tell me that 150 years later, people are making commemorative scarabs of her? It doesn't quite pass the smell test, does it? It's what we call verisimilitude. The Bible describes something. Do you find something that passes the smell test? and this doesn't. Strike one on Kenyon's views. Strike two comes on the pottery. Kenyon was looking in what we would call City 4 at Jericho. We would all agree that that's the right terminology. And she's in the more poor residential section at Jericho, and she's looking for Cypriot, that means from Cyprus, Cypriot bichrome pottery. Bichrome means it has two colors. And it's a very well-known, fancy type of pottery from that time period. She says, well, we didn't find it. It's not there, and so surely it would have been there, and that's the big thing that she bases this on. No Israelites, because we have no Cypriot bichrome pottery at Jericho. Okay, so major principle in archaeology. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because they couldn't prove that O.J. killed his wife didn't mean he didn't do it. Whether he did or not, okay. Just an example. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Many things can happen to the evidence. You get a city that's burned. If you get a strong wind you get a heavy rain and a strong wind, it's all gone. And then we dig it up 2,000 years later, and you can say, well, the Bible said that they burned this. Where's the destruction layer? Fortunately for us, the 3 cities that the Bible says were burned by the Israelites, we do have a destruction layer. But could have easily had a rain and some wind, and we would not have had it. That wouldn't mean that the Bible wasn't true. You have to understand that only 5% of the land of the Bible has been excavated. 5%. All these sweeping conclusions that you hear about are based on 5% of the evidence. You think we might have something in the other 95% that might shed light on the matter at hand? Okay, I digress. Back to the pottery. Cypriot bichrome pottery. Kenyon says she doesn't have it in City 4 in the residential quarter, but guess what? Garstein did. He has the imitation Cypriot pottery. Jericho's not on the trade routes. Jericho's in the backwater, quite frankly. It's not anywhere near the Via Maris or the coast where you would expect to find this. And here is the Cypriot bichrome pottery, the local imitation of it, that clearly dates to the time of the conquest. One of the challenges is this. Pottery forms start in one century, and they carry and they gradually change over time. It's not like in the year 1400, all the potters had a convention and said, okay, guys, we're going to start making new pottery. So it's not an exact science, it's more of an art many times, because you're having to take many factors into account, and by itself, you wouldn't want to just use pottery as a means of dating. What we're looking for is a triangulation. We want to take 3 dating methods, 4 if you will. Let's take the Bible, let's take pottery, the Bible and other ancient texts, then let's take pottery, and then let's take scientific dating like carbon dating, which I'll explain in a minute, when we can trust it and when we can't trust it. And then let's take coins and scarabs, glyptic material. All of those things, if they're pointing to the same date, then we can have a great confidence that it happened at that particular time. So on the basis of pottery, who Kenyon in her own words said she had no expertise in late Bronze Age pottery, on the basis of that pottery that she says didn't exist, actually did exist, and even if it didn't by itself, that would not be a huge means for concern, because remember that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Here you can see nicely the rampart system at Jericho with the upper city wall and the lower city wall. And this is without dispute, by the way. All the archaeologists agree that you have an inner wall and an outer wall and an earthen embankment in between them. I want you to notice the stone wall here, this revetment wall. It's almost 20 feet high. You can see the representation of a man standing there. That stone revetment wall is still standing today. The stone walls of Jericho didn't fall. What fell were the mud brick walls. Another 30 feet of that, or 25 feet, let's say, of that. Maybe you've got about 45 feet altogether between stone and mud brick that is encircling the city. When the walls of Jericho fell, it was the massive mud brick superstructure that collapsed, and we're going to see in a minute exactly how it collapsed. Now, these walls are important. Kathleen Kenyon says referring to us evangelicals, us Neanderthals, she would say, it can't possibly be that you had Israelites at Jericho. That was in the late Bronze Age, around 1400. Can't possibly be. These are Middle Bronze Age walls. That's what we call a straw man argument. She's making it seem like we're arguing something that we're not arguing. Of course they're Middle Bronze Age walls. We don't dispute that. We don't care when the walls of Jericho were built. We care when they fell. So by making that line of argumentation, she's making it seem like we're arguing that Middle Bronze Age walls are late Bronze Age walls. Guys, we've got walls still standing thousands of years later. So the fact that they were built in the Middle Bronze Age a few hundred years before is no big deal. Gary showed examples yesterday of mud brick walls still standing after thousands of years. So let's dig in a little deeper. Fortunately for us, we have an eyewitness account. It's found in the Bible, Joshua 6:20. So the people shouted, the Hebrew word is teruah. The people shouted, and priests blew the trumpets. And when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout. They gave a teruah, and the wall fell down flat so that the people went up into the city. I want you to notice that little detail. They went up into the city, something that an eyewitness would know. Every man straight ahead, and they took the city. Now let's pause and think a little bit about why Jericho is important. You've been wandering, you've been slaves for hundreds of years. Now you've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. You've got nothing. You haven't even, they've just celebrated their first Passover since they've left. They can't even celebrate the Feast of First Fruits yet because they don't have anything. You cannot pay your tithe if you have no income, okay? And first fruits is separate from your tithe anyway. First fruits is a faith gift given to God at the beginning of the harvest. The tithe comes at the end of the harvest. You had 100 bushels, you calculate it up, and you give 10 of those. That's your tithe. Your first fruits offering is given to God at the beginning of the harvest. It's a faith offering. And that's what God told them Jericho was going to be. He said, I want you to leave everything there. Don't take a single thing from it. It's going to be a heap offering, a mound offering, a first fruits offering unto me. So what does a first fruits offering mean? And by the way, Jesus rose from the dead on what day? First fruits. The Sunday, so first fruit, Passover's on Friday. The Sunday after Passover is the Feast of First Fruits. No wonder the Apostle Paul tells us that Jesus was the first fruits of the resurrection because he rises on First Fruits Sunday. So what is the first fruits? When you give a first fruits offering to God, you're saying two things. Number one, Lord, thank you for where you brought me from. Thank you for where you brought me from. Some of you can say a big amen to that. I heard a preacher say a while back, I may not be where I want to be, but thank God I'm not where I used to be. Thank you, Lord, for where you brought me from. I know you took me out of Egypt, and I'm giving this sacrificial gift to express my gratitude. Number two, a first fruits offering expresses, Lord, I trust you that you're going to fully manifest my inheritance for me. I trust you that you're going to give me all these other cities because I'm giving you the first and the best and the richest. Now, this comes at a time when you've got no guarantee of the harvest. You're taking the first peppers and the first tomatoes, and the first okra off the vine, the first cherries off the trees. I love your cherry trees around here. And I've got no guarantee that the rest of the harvest is going to come in. We could have an infestation. We could have a drought. We could have an enemy that comes in and wipes out the harvest. I've got no guarantees, and I'm hungry at this point. Okay? It's been a long time since we've had a harvest. And we're in need. So out of my sacrifice, out of my need, I give to the Lord. And that's what they did at Jericho. The people went up and they took the city and they left it as a harem, under the ban, off limits, is the biblical word, harem. It's the same word for like a harem. A king has a harem. That means they're off limits, okay? So the Bible says that the whole city was harem. It was under the ban. It was off limits. Here you can see Dr. Wood standing at the base of this stone revetment wall that I was mentioning earlier, and you can get an idea of how large the wall is. Now, Dr. Wood being so frustrated by this situation, went back. He already had a successful career as a nuclear engineer. Went back to school and earned a PhD at University of Toronto in Syro-Palestinian archaeology with a dissertation in late Bronze Age pottery. So Kathleen Kenyon says, I have no expertise in late Bronze Age pottery. Bryant Wood comes and earns his PhD in late Bronze Age pottery and says, we are going to do a post-mortem autopsy on the excavation reports of Kathleen Kenyon. He had to go all around the world to pull all the pottery back together to do this analysis. And here you see Dr. Wood standing at the base of the tell. We call this the Second Battle of Jericho. Here you can see the new work being done by Sapienza University of Rome at the base of that revetment wall. By the way, if you happen to be an evangelical Christian, don't bother applying to work on that dig. Had 2 members of my dig team apply. One had a master's degree in archaeology, one had a PhD. They both had extensive field experience. They applied to work as volunteers. They weren't asking for a staff position or a paid position. They wanted to volunteer. You know what they were told when they found out that they were evangelicals? No, thank you. Don't confuse me with any of this other ways of looking at things. We've got our minds made up. We've got our circular reasoning in place. We're not interested. So much for intellectual honesty. You can see here in the 1950s how those mud bricks are still clinging to the top of the wall. They've now decomposed, but they were there in the 30s and in the 50s, as a matter of fact. Now, the Bible is clear, according to Joshua 2:6, that it was harvest time when the Israelites took the city. They had just brought in their big harvest, and they were able to celebrate Passover in the plains. You see the German dig, the Garstein dig, and the Kenyan dig. All 3 found mud brick on still a few courses of mud brick still on top of that stone wall, and evidence of where it had fallen over. And that's what we want to look at. Next, here's Garstein standing next to that revetment wall. You can see the mud brick still there. It's not there today, but this is picked from the 1930s. All right, now if you forget everything else I've said today, don't forget this slide. Get your phones out, if that's permissible, and take a picture of this slide. Don't forget this. Like the seminary professor told his students, young man, go sell everything you own and buy Spurgeon, okay? So forget everything else I've told you. Well, don't forget it. But if you do, this is the one thing you want to remember is this slide. I want you to imagine all that black and white stuff isn't there, because those are from later time periods after the conquest of Jericho. So it's Byzantine and Roman and all kinds of stuff. So forget about the black and white. Just think about the color. There's our stone wall. Can anybody read that? What does that say? Fallen red bricks. Guess whose handwriting that is? Kathleen Kenyon. Those red bricks, using your logic, your God-given common sense, where do you think they came from? Obviously right here, right? They've fallen over. Now, what did we just read in the Bible? That the walls fell over and the men went up into the city. Do you see what has happened here when those mud bricks collapsed? They have created a ramp. What seemed to be an impenetrable obstacle has now become a ramp into their destiny. Now, if I may make a faith lesson from this, think about your own life, the obstacles and the walls that you face. If we will do things God's way and trust Him, what seems to be our greatest obstacle will convert into a ramp for our destiny. This picture shows us exactly what happens. And this is Kenyon's own drawing. Here's what she writes. The first tip line was fallen red bricks piling nearly to the top of the revetment. These probably came from the wall on the summit of the bank. Well, they certainly did. She says probably. The brickwork above the revetment. Kenyon agrees those mud bricks used to be standing and now they have fallen over. It's not. can't dispute the evidence. All she's saying is it's 150 years before the Bible says that it happened, so it could not have been the Israelites. We have the matter of Rahab's house. When the walls of Jericho fell, guess what the Germans discovered? There was only one section of the city wall that didn't fall, a little section on the north. Well, isn't that funny? What was God's promise to Rahab? He was going to protect her and her family. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall. She was living on the wall. So the young men who were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all she had. Here's a recreation of what this looked like, the walls of Jericho, the area that was left standing on the north side. Notice that artistically you've got flax drying on the roof because, of course, the Bible says that she was drying flax on her roof. It was right after the harvest. This is that city 4 that is now all covered up. You can't see it if you go there today. This is an artistic recreation. I believe, Gary, I may have seen a painting of this in your classroom yesterday. Another look at City 4, the residential quarter, and the area where we see the rebuild of Jericho in the 13th century that I believe pertained to Eglon's palace, and we won't take time to get down into the weeds there. But it's an important point because if you try to place the Exodus and conquest in the 13th century, which sadly the majority of evangelicals are doing, they have abandoned the biblical date and they're trying to place it in the 13th century, then you've got a problem with that later occupational level. Whereas if you put it where the Bible says that it was, it synchronizes perfectly. You've got a 15th century layer and a 13th century layer. Now the Bible says that the city was destroyed by fire. So the people shouted. Only 3 cities, by the way, destroyed by fire: Jericho, Ai, and Hatzor. Why do you think they didn't burn the other cities? That's their inheritance. You know how expensive it is to build a city? He promises them, you're going to occupy cities you didn't build. You're going to live in houses that you did not construct. They don't want to burn this stuff down. This is their inheritance from the Lord. So they do destroy Jericho. It's going to be this mound offering. They shouted, the priests blew the trumpets, and when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat so that the people went up into the city, every man straight ahead, and they took the city. They burned the city with fire and all that was in it. What does archaeology tell us? These are the words of Kathleen Kenyon. The destruction was complete. Walls and floors were blackened or reddened by fire, and every room was filled with fallen bricks, timbers, and household utensils. In most of the rooms, the fallen debris was heavily burnt, but the collapse of the walls of the eastern room seems to have taken place before they were affected by fire. The walls fall, then the fire comes. What did we just read in Joshua 6? The walls fell, the city was burned. Kenyon says the walls fell, the city was burned. I'm just scratching the surface this morning, okay? The evidence is overwhelming that this matches the biblical account. Kenyon and Garstang both found storage jars full of grain. Gary showed us some burned grain yesterday. These storage jars are filled to the top. This is gold in the ancient world. I'm telling you, this is a fortune. An enemy who destroyed this city would have never left all this grain behind. This would have made them rich, this quantity of grain. They left all the grain there, just the top is burned, but these jars are full of grain. Now, someone tell me, why do you think this particular invader left all these jars full of grain? It's called first fruits. This is our first fruits offering that we've given to the Lord, and they're filled to the top. What does that tell us? It was a short siege. Normally a siege was 7 months in biblical times. The Bible says this was 7 days. And sure enough, the food supply, they're still at the top. So whoever destroyed this city, it was a very short siege. You can see some of that charred grain on the top of these storage jars, confirming the biblical account. in one of the trenches at Jericho. We have here, the jars are still clinging to the balk. I'm sad to tell you that when I was there about 6 months ago, they're no longer clinging to the balk. After all these years from the 1950s, they finally caved in. But it was all these years it was just there shouting to us and reminding us that we could trust the biblical account. So clearly it wasn't plundered. The Bible says that they didn't plunder it. The archaeological evidence indicates that they did not plunder the city. As I said, the siege was short, lasting only a week. How did the walls of Jericho fall? Well, Hebrews 11 is very clear. They fell by faith. What causes men and women to march around a city, blow trumpets, do things God's way, and to trust that it's going to happen? It's faith. The application for us is that as we face walls and obstacles, if we do it God's way, by faith, we'll also see ramps into our destinies. Let's summarize. 3 basic lines of argument: scarabs, ceramics, pottery, and walls. You've seen here that they really match up quite nicely with the biblical account. I think if that clock is accurate, is it? Then I've got 1 minute. 1 minute, okay. So, carbon dating. I mentioned that we use carbon dating. One of the big issues at Jericho is carbon dating. Now, Kenyon, some of her samples were tested, and they dated to 1550, and this was her big argument, carbon dating versus the Bible. Well, we have a very interesting site in Egypt called Avaris, and the archaeologist is Manfred Betak. He's not a Christian, but he's a senior archaeologist. And Betak has released groundbreaking research that has shocked academia. Manfred Betak says prior to 1400, the carbon dates can't be trusted. They begin to vary a carbon variance from 1400 backward. Isn't that interesting? And he's not a Christian, but he's he's the dean of archaeologists. And now they don't know what to do with Manfred. Poor Manfred is off he's gone off the rails. He's telling us we can't trust carbon dating before 1400 BC. That's the exact time that we need it for the dating of Jericho. Based on Betak's evidence, then, that carbon date, and again, even by itself, that would not be enough to make the case. But that puts it in, no one has even answered that yet, by the way. It's just out there and it's truth, and they don't know what to do with it. So we take these lines of evidence, and I want you to know you could have great confidence in the biblical text. God bless you.